A warning for listeners that this series contains graphic details, including references to murder and rape. Millions of tourists, crowds of commuters, searing heat, and an entire city built on the foundations of some of the world's most iconic ancient ruins. Athens is a holiday haven for Europeans and international travellers alike. You could lose yourself in its history and all those people if you wanted. And so could anybody looking for you. No cares, no worries, not even about statutes of limitation. For some serious crimes anyway. For Victoria Police homicide detectives, that was a problem. It had been a problem for years. And if they ever wanted answers for the families of Sue Armstrong and Sue Bartlett, they were going to have to get creative. The bombshell breakthrough in Australia's most infamous cold case would be highly confidential, high stakes, and high time for the two Sues. My name is Olivia Jenkins, and I'm a crime reporter at the Herald-Sun, and this is Hunting Justice, a deep dive into one of Australia's most brutal cold cases, the 1977 murder of Easey Street housemates Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett, and the man who, according to police, is at the centre of the investigation. It had been almost 50 years since Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett were brutally slain inside their own home, which also meant it had been almost 50 years since investigators had gathered evidence from the crime scene. Police protocols and forensic science have changed a lot in half a century. Today, every single thing is logged, bagged, and entered into evidence. But back in the 70s, things were vastly different. One of the challenges prosecutors face in modern trials of historical murders. There were so many questions. Had detectives fumbled or contaminated evidence at the Easey Street murder scene? Urinated there even? Were they wearing gloves, bagging exhibits separately, or had items all been thrown carelessly into one big bag altogether? Did the knife Constable Iddles took from Perry Karumblis even have any blood on it? How were all these exhibits stored? Were they left out in the open? Under heat? That's what Perry Karumblis' high-profile defence barrister, Dermot Dan, wanted to know from witness after witness, officer after officer, as his client sat in the dock, wedged between two guards, all while the Sue's loved ones watched on. The veteran barrister argued the so-called DNA evidence linking an accused double murderer to Victoria's most infamous unsolved crime was flimsy, potentially contaminated. It should be tossed out by a magistrate altogether, Mr. Dan argued. But the prosecution insisted investigators had the right man. And in September 2024, they just needed him to fly into their trap.
The flight patrol was carried out by a team of 4 or 5 state police officers who filtered all the passengers getting off the flight until the subject was identified. We checked all the people who had a match in terms of physical characteristics and possible age of the individual.
That's the head of Rome Fiumicino's airport police, Fernando Speziali. We've translated his interview from Italian to English, where he first revealed to the Herald-Sun the moment the latest development in the case began to unfold on his doorstep. But back in Australia, as the delicate Roman snare was about to snap around Perry Karumblis, the families of his alleged victims were none the wiser. To the entire country, the Easey Street murders were known as a terrifying mystery, but not one that was likely to ever be solved, even to generations of crime reporters like Anthony Dowsley.
This case has spanned such a long time that, we have Andrew Rule, who's at the later end of his career. You're about 20 years older than me, and now I'm coming in covering it. That's 3 generations reporters just in the one newsroom. Do you think we'd ever get to this point?
To be honest, after the articles in 2017, I actually kind of forgot about it because it didn't seem like that was heading anywhere. There was no indication that they had actually targeted someone. I got no kind of inference from them that there was someone they were really interested in. It just seemed like they were just doing their due diligence to try and limit the amount of people that they were after.
It was slow, grinding work, the type that doesn't make the movies, but eventually there was a breakthrough. Over the past few years, the homicide squad had gone back to that list of key suspects to retest their DNA to rule them in or out of the investigation. And on the 6th of January 2017, they approached Perry Karumblis for a sample of his DNA, and he initially agreed. Police had worked through the list of 134 people, and 41 of them, at that point, were dead. There was at least one missing sample in their mounting case file on the murders, Perry's. According to investigators, the other men on their list of key suspects had been ruled out. All of that was kept out of the spotlight. But the Sue's murders were thrust back into the news just a week later, when the Victoria Police Homicide Squad announced a $1 million reward for information that led to their killer. Sue Armstrong's sister Gail led the plea for leads next to detectives at a media conference on January 15. It was there that she shared her frustrations over the early investigation, telling reporters that her family wasn't interviewed and they had to make an appointment to speak with police about the case. But back in Dandenong, Perry told his friend Phil Akers that the next time he left for Greece, he might not be coming back. His mother was too unwell. By the 9th of May, he was gone, taking his DNA with him. Here's Andrew Rule.
It would appear that when the police spoke routinely, just another boring day on the job, knocked on a door in, Doncaster or Bulleen or somewhere, and they get this bloke, Pericles Karumblis, and they say, "Oh, hello, we're from blah, 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 can you please do this?" And he apparently said, "No problem. Yeah, look, I'm just busy now, whatever. When do you want me to do it? Yeah, next Wednesday, next Friday, whatever." He made an appointment, whatever, to do the swab. And then he vanished. He went to Greece and stayed there, which is fine because his parents had moved there.
But Perry's absence didn't deter investigators. At that committal you've heard a lot about through this series so far, we learned for the first time exactly how they kept pushing for a breakthrough. Perry had been in Greece for about a year by 2018, when they approached his brother Tony, who lives in Melbourne's eastern suburbs, for a sample of his DNA. Remember Dr. Dadna Hartman's breakdown of what police could do with that sample?
So we will recover a DNA profile, compare that hopefully to family members to identify that individual. Any other evidence that we can gather from the remains to help us build as much forensic evidence to support that DNA match. And we've had a number of cases where, although the DNA may be indicative that these people are related, when we've looked at all the other evidence together, that doesn't hold true.
It was a Hail Mary moment for Victoria Police. A tissue sample taken from one of Perry's old cars and a DNA sample from Perry's own brother was enough to convince a magistrate to issue a warrant for Perry's arrest from half a world away. But police, aware of their alleged fugitive's general whereabouts and sensitive to how quickly an investigation of this magnitude could collapse, kept the breakthrough behind closed doors. Those who knew the Sues were still in the dark. To them, the case was as cold as ever. Their friends Warren Tucker and Neville Webster.
We're getting a bit older, and some of our cohort have passed on. So unless this is resolved, we'll go without it ever being resolved. So.
Yeah, well, our vintage will not know about it.
Yeah.
A DNA sample in Melbourne, Australia, and their new person of interest in Athens, Greece. To the frustration of police, their hunt for justice had suddenly morphed into an international operation. By late 2024, 65-year-old Perry Karumblis had been living with his brother, Andreas, in Athens for several years. So how did the hunt for Perry stretch halfway around the world? He continued to live his quiet life in the Greek capital, away from the occasional news headline about the murders on Easey St. The only time his name had ever appeared, as far as the public records went, was all the way back in the late 70s, when coroner Harry Pascoe noted that he'd been in possession of a knife in the days after the murders. No one, not even the Sue's families, knew his name, but one 2-hour direct flight was about to change everything. If Victoria Police wanted Perry back in Australia, they needed to pick him up somewhere else. In the years leading up to his dramatic arrest, we believe Perry stayed in Greece that entire time, which meant Australian authorities couldn't arrest him there. Australia does have what's called an extradition treaty with Greece. That's when two or more countries mutually agree to hand over a suspected or convicted criminal they find in their country to the country where they allegedly committed a serious crime. But the problem for Australian authorities was Greece's 20-year statute of limitations for serious crimes such as murder. That period, which is the maximum time period after an event in which charges can be laid, usually begins from the date of the crime. By the time they'd set their sights on Perry, 43 years had passed since Suzanne Armstrong and Sue Bartlett were murdered. And Perry landed right in the middle of a trap, his brother Andreas says. Perry's other brother in Melbourne, Tony, told the media that Perry had been approached by a Greek-Australian investor who was interested in buying one of their family's properties in Greece. That business opportunity seemed to require Perry to travel. And so, as soon as the flight from Athens touched down in Rome, it set off the biggest development this case had ever seen. The moment Perry boarded that flight from Athens to Rome's Fiumicino airport, it triggered an international Interpol alert called a red notice. That red notice lets countries share information with one another in case a person wanted in one part of the world is tracked down in another. Which means when Italian tactical police was searching for Perry on that flight, they had the green light to arrest him. And this is what Perry's brother told reporters from behind the fly screen of the front door at his Baldwin North home.
Definitely don't think he's capable of doing anything like that.
And
if he was going to hide too, he wouldn't have stayed here for 40 years plus after that. You know what I mean? He would have left 6 months, 2 years, 1 year, whatever.
That news sent shockwaves around the country. After decades of uncertainty, hundreds of leads and dozens of suspects, one of Australia's most violent, unsolved crimes looked like it may finally be solved. No one had waited longer for answers than Sue Armstrong's and Sue Bartlett's family and friends.
When we heard about the arrest here last year with Tories, that's great news for us all, that someone's been finally caught for us.
Italian journalist and photographer Eric Massori worked with the Herald Sun every step of the way through Perry's arrest. With me in Melbourne and Eric in Rome, he and I worked closely together while Perry was being held in Italy, leading every development of the task to bring him back to Australia. For Eric to send us developments as quickly as possible, he sent them in his native tongue, which meant I had to brush up on my Italian, and fast.
I was contacted in the early hours of the morning of Perry's arrest. I started working non-stop on the case. We got in direct contact with the people involved. Police, Perry's lawyer, judges.
Perry was now in custody in one of Rome's most crowded jails, and Victoria Police had to wait for local authorities to move the case along. A gamble, and one where everyone wanted to know, what now? Here's Eric again.
Perry was in isolation. Regina Coeli is one of the best-known prisons in Italy. The cell conditions were standard for a country that respects personal dignity. One of Perry's requests was to be able to speak with his Greek brother.
Perry had to appear before an Italian court, and his public defender, Serena Tucci, gave us the first insight into how Perry seemed to be coping with his arrest.
During the interrogation, Perry Karamblis availed himself of the right not to answer, so he didn't give us any useful information about what had happened. However, he did proclaim his innocence.
And so, the court decided, Victorian homicide detectives would escort Perry back to Melbourne. Serena Tucci told us what Perry was facing.
He did proclaim his innocence, and a very important point is that he gave his consent for extradition. This is the central point of the interrogation. His condition seemed good. He asked to speak with his brother, but his condition was good. Extradition procedures are not easy to understand, so I wanted to make sure that he was fully capable of understanding exactly what was happening to him, because the consent is irrevocable.
It was an intense day. We arrived at Fiumicino Airport. Perry arrived in a police van. Everything was carried out with great discretion.
Entrambi le autorità hanno condotto questa operazione di estradizione nella massima discrezione.
Dean Thomas, the head of Victoria Police's homicide squad, and other homicide detectives, including Paul Rowe, were in Rome, and the operation was underway, in front of a plane load of regular passengers. Perry sat wedged between the detectives in an economy seat the entire time, keeping his head down with his headphones on. And in Melbourne, on the night of December 4, the wait for his plane to land from its layover in Qatar was on, and so was the race to catch a glimpse of the man who was now front and centre of the investigation. Melbourne Airport became the scene of a media circus as we all tried to catch a glimpse of the flight QR905 as it touched down on the tarmac. The limited view of the international gates from inside Qantas's domestic terminal didn't offer my photographer and I much luck, and Perry was being ushered off the plane as we spoke. So, we made the split-second decision to race to Victoria Police's headquarters in Melbourne CBD. It was 1 a.m. by this point, and surely they couldn't take him anywhere else. That's what we thought anyway. And about an hour later, the siren sounded, and the roller door was open. The detectives were on their way, and we thought they'd have Perry with him. And they did. An unmarked silver police car sped towards the entrance on Latrobe Street, where we were waiting. And as it sped into the secure car park, Perry, again, sat between the detectives. Only this time, he used his dark coloured jacket to hide his face from our cameras. The next morning, the updates continued.
Mr Kurrumblaze landed back on Australian soil just before midnight. He was the first person ushered off the Qatar Airways flight by immigration officers before he was rushed to police headquarters.
And so Perry, who had maintained his innocence since his arrest, was sitting in custody inside a Melbourne jail. You may remember in episode 3 where we broke down what committals are here in Victoria, where evidence from the prosecution and defence is heard by a magistrate, who then decides whether an accused person will stand trial. We've brought in a lot of what was aired in those hearings before Magistrate Brett Sonnet throughout this series so far. And just over a year after Perry was arrested, the committal meant it was time for the prosecution to put their evidence to the test and for his defence team to do their best to get it tossed out. So, over 5 days inside the Melbourne Magistrates Court, the Sue's supporters watched every moment. They constantly glanced over at Perry, who by this stage sat each day under close watch by 2 custody officers in a white suit and looked directly ahead almost the entire time. Suzanne Armstrong's sister, Gail, stared him down every single day, as every brutal detail about her sister's and her best friend's horrific murders was aired out in the open. Sue Armstrong, in her front bedroom, laying on her back with her nightie pulled up over her chest, her legs spread apart, a pool of blood under her head, the possibility she'd been raped, and dozens of knife wounds. Sue Bartlett lying face down, just metres away in the hallway, many of the knife wounds in her back and stomach. Blood and semen in Sue Armstrong's bedroom, blood in the hallway and in the lounge. Prosecutor Zubin Menon told the court that their case relied, quote, almost exclusively on DNA evidence from the crime scene, and they believed that was more likely to be Perry's than anyone else's. Over the next few days, Perry's defence barrister, Dermot Dan KC, pored over many of those DNA samples, probing first responders and detectives about their handling of the scene, raising concerns about some of the exhibits possibly being contaminated over time, and due to police protocols that perhaps weren't as stringent in the 70s. The court heard a newspaper in the house dated the day the girls were discovered turned out to belong to a responding officer who had used it for shade. And that knife former Officer Ron Iddles seized from Perry days after the murders, could it even be the murder weapon? The court heard it had been tested for blood multiple times throughout the investigation, and no blood was found on its blade or sheath, Mr. Dan said, and forensic technicians confirmed this. The court also heard testing of the knife to see if it fit as the murder weapon was, quote, inconclusive. That long list of witnesses, those who were still alive, retold their version of events as best they could. Barry Woodard, his brother Henry, Alona Stevens and Janet Powell, former detectives, forensic biologists, and first responders. Mr. Dan probed them all too. Where were they on January 10, 1977, the night the Sues were believed to have been murdered? How did police preserve the crime scene? How did they walk through or store evidence to ensure a proper chain of custody? Did officers wear gloves? How many people walked into the crime scene after the women's bodies were discovered? Or could one of them instead be the real killer, not his client Perry, like the prosecution were alleging? After 5 days inside a stuffy, full courtroom, Perry just metres away from the families of the women police say he killed, Magistrate Sonnet had decided. Perry's charge of carnal knowledge, though, which would be known as rape today, was thrown out. Magistrate Sonnet struck it out because he found there wasn't enough evidence to hold up that conviction, because detectives had told the committal Sue Armstrong appeared to have been raped after she was killed and not before. The Sue's loved ones sat stoic in the front row of the courtroom as Perry twice said he pleaded not guilty to each count of murder before he was led away. Sue Armstrong's sister Gail quickly left the court with a friend, and homicide detective Paul Rowe, the informant for this case, and one of the officers that escorted Perry back to Melbourne, not wanting to comment publicly on this next stage of the case. Harumblus remains in custody at the Melbourne Assessment Prison and is due to appear at the Supreme Court soon for an administrative hearing. For 50 years, the horrors unleashed on Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett have plagued their families. To the public, they became a cautionary tale, a statistic, the women at the centre of a forgotten and then remembered and then forgotten again crime. For decades, their friends, students, and their neighbours have been tormented by memories of two women who brought their lives so much joy when their own were taken so violently. I've come to know so much about Sue Armstrong and Sue Bartlett through death, but through hours of interviews, countless phone calls, road trips, photographs, and cups of tea, it's been a privilege to help paint a picture of how they lived and everything that made them who they were, long before there was ever a hunt for justice. And the hunt isn't over yet. This show is hosted, researched, and written by me, Olivia Jenkins. It was produced, edited, and written by Jonty Burton. Our video producer is Daniel Coates. Our graphic designers are Kirko Dwyer and Sean Lee. Geordie Atkinson is our executive producer. You can find all of our coverage of this case at huntingjustice.com.au. You can also find every article, video, and episode of this series, as well as the crime stories Melbourne cares about most, by joining our Facebook group, Herald Sun Crime and Courts. If you have questions, feedback, or something you think we should know, get in touch with us anytime. Our email address is heraldsuncrime@news.com.au, or you can contact me securely. Those details are in the show notes.